The topic that we're going to talk about tonight is Hulk Hogan, who Eric obviously worked with a lot. We're going to go into his career with Eric. So I want to ask you, first of all, everyone knows the story of Ric Flair connected you guys in 1994. You bring him to WCW. Talk a little bit about negotiating with Hulk Hogan on that deal. How challenging it was, how difficult it was to get it to work.
It's two different stories, really. Dealing with Hulk Hogan as a person was very easy because he's a nice guy. He's a very generous person. He's easy to deal with. He doesn't put on a show in a negotiation. A lot of times you're negotiating. I've negotiated. Thank you so much. A lot of times you deal with people and they go into a negotiation acting like they have to present themselves in a certain way, and it's not real. Hulk was the opposite. He was very open, very honest. However, he had an attorney by the name of Henry Holmes, who was a animal. He's just an animal. And that part was very, very difficult. That being said, they were very clear right from the very beginning. Here's what this deal has to look like. These are our parameters. And there wasn't a lot of room for negotiation. Fortunately, Ted Turner was very committed. Bill Shaw, who was my boss at the time, who worked for Ted Turner, made sure that I had the resources that I need and as much support as I possibly could get from Turner Broadcasting to make the deal happen. So it was tough because they were tough, but I think the whole process only took about 60 days, which is not a long time for a deal like that.
And I mean, what was there a lot of trades that WCW had to make to get him? How important was it for WCW to get that deal?
It was critical because, let me back up just a little bit. When I was hired as executive producer, and I think that was about 1993, I was hired in that position because Bill Watts, who had formerly been the executive vice president of WCW, said and did some really stupid things that provided a lot of embarrassment for Turner Broadcasting. He made some very stupid racial comments very publicly, and all of that got back to Ted Turner and to a gentleman by the name of Hank Aaron. And if you don't know who Hank Aaron is in the United States, Hank Aaron is a Major League Baseball legend. And Hank Aaron had an office right down the hall from Ted Turner. So when the comments that Bill Watts made very publicly, and they were very racial and very tasteless, made their way back to Ted Turner, Bill Watts got fired. Ted Turner himself was very embarrassed. The company was embarrassed. And Ted appointed Bill Shaw. I know this is complicated and maybe boring, but I want to give you the background. Bill Shaw was the vice president of human resources at the time. So Ted said to Bill Shaw, Bill, I want you to fire Bill Watts, take over WCW, and we're either going to make this thing work, it's either going to turn a profit, or we're going to pull the plug. That was important because up until that point, the only reason that WCW existed was because Ted Turner really believed in WCW. All of the other senior executives in Turner Broadcasting at that time really wanted to get rid of it. They had tried to talk Ted into getting rid of WCW, but Ted was adamant. He was determined to keep WCW as a part of Turner Broadcasting. But at this point that I'm referring to in 1993, even Ted Turner had had his fill. So the challenge was to turn WCW around as quickly and professionally as possible with the least amount of embarrassment. So Bill Shaw came down to the WCW offices one day and he just basically read us the riot act. Now, Bill was a very nice Southern gentleman, but he made it very clear that WCW was either going to turn around and turn a profit very soon or Ted was going to pull the plug. Okay. So I ended up getting the job. I was promoted once or twice along the way. We actually started at least appearing as though there was a half a chance that we could make a profit. And I went to Bill Shaw one day and said, what if we could bring Hulk Hogan in? Because that would be the one, like the big domino, that if we could get that domino, there would be other dominoes that would fall along the way. And Bill was very supportive of it. He went to Ted Turner, got Ted Turner's support, and bringing Hulk in was really the thing that there was it was like a chain of events that happened after Hulk Hogan. First, Hulk Hogan came, well, back it up even further. I started producing television shows at the Disney MGM studios, which to the wrestling fans, it didn't matter. In fact, a lot of them really didn't like the idea because it was Disney, MGM, or wrestling. That doesn't fit. But from a business perspective and from a financial perspective, it made a lot of sense. So we started doing things that made sense business-wise so that when the opportunity for Hulk Hogan became real, Ted had a lot more confidence in WCW than he had a year earlier and was willing to make it happen. And once Hulk came in, guess who followed in his footsteps? Oh, yeah, step into a little Randy Savage, brother. You're probably not familiar with the Slim Jim commercials, but Randy Savage was a spokesperson for Slim Jim for a long time. Randy Savage came in, and by the way, Slim Jim came in right behind him. Randy Savage's contract was $750,000 a year. That's what I signed Randy for. The Slim Jim sponsorship was $750,000 a year. I got Randy for free, and I got a deal on Slim Jims.
And when you bring Hulk in, his first programs with Ric Flair, you guys do pay-per-views together. Were the results in WCW instant? Were you seeing results financially and all that straight away when you
It's
got?
a really, really good question. Really good question. There was a lot of curiosity. There was a lot of buzz. There was a lot of awareness amongst wrestling fans that Hulk Hogan was coming in and he was going to be working with Ric Flair. So the first pay-per-view did really well. But interestingly enough, television ratings didn't move a whole lot. There were two classifications of wrestling fans. There were the former or current WWE fans, and there were current WCW fans. And the WCW fan base was much, much smaller than the WWE fan base. So when Hulk Hogan first came in, a lot of that WWE fan base had never really watched WCW because at the time it was considered to be kind of Southern wrestling, kind of small regional country boy wrestling, whereas the WWE was perceived to be a big international brand. But a lot of that WWE audience came to sample us. They wanted to see Hulk Hogan at WCW. Wow, that's weird. Let's go check it out. And they did. But once the newness of it wore off, we started seeing the television audience kind of go back down to where it was. The big difference was on the business to business side, meaning advertisers, potential sponsors, the pay-per-view partnerships we had. Why is that important? For example, when we do a pay-per-view prior to Hulk Hogan, it was a 60-40. So if we sold the pay-per-view for $30, the pay-per-view company would get 60% of that, we would get 40%. Once Hulk Hogan came on board, I was able to flip that. Now we're getting 60% and they're getting 40%. So right off the bat, we're making a greater profit margin on our pay-per-views just because we have Hulk Hogan. Now at that point in time, we're probably making around $2 million a pay-per-view. Well, that's $200,000 a pay-per-view that we got to raise. So that's where Hulk started paying off big dividends very quickly, was on the business to business side.
When Hulk came in, followed people like Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Honky Tonk Man, the Nasty Boys, all people who had been in WWF, had been there for a while. I'm guessing that was maybe part of the deal, and that to get Hulk, you kind of have to have some people that he feels comfortable with. What was that like?
The only person that was part of the deal contractually was Jimmy Hart. Jimmy Hart was the only person that you mentioned, and there were more than you mentioned, that was actually part of the contract. Jimmy had his own contract, and it was referenced in Hulk's contract. The rest of it kind of happened organically, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Hulk had a lot of influence, right? And part of the position that I was in is anybody that's ever managed talent will be able to tell you no matter how much they dislike the fact that they have to admit it. But when you've got a key piece of talent like a Hulk Hogan, or if it's an actor or an actress or probably a football player here, or a rugby player, if you've got a big star, that big star has a certain amount of influence. And Hulk had influence. So a lot of those names I brought in to kind of keep the big star happy, because Hulk felt comfortable with that group of people around him. Hulk is a very unique person. He's a larger-than-life character. And, if you go back and you look at him, late 70s when he was first breaking in, or early 80s, mid-80s, certainly by the late 80s and early 90s, he was a larger-than-life character. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He was on, he was the most, other than probably Muhammad Ali at the time, one of the most recognized characters in the world. But it's interesting sometimes how people like that are, in some ways, insecure, to the extent that they want to be surrounded with people that they're comfortable with, that they know and they can trust. And that's how Hulk was able to influence me to bring in, not all of those names. Some of those names I thought did have their own value. They all had value, some more than others, but like Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Hacksaw was at the end of his career by that point in time. He certainly wasn't at the peak of it, right? But if you go back and watch some of the shows, if you could find them from 94, 95, when Hacksaw would come out, the crowd reacted. He was almost a nostalgia act at that time, but they really, really loved him. Nasty Boys. I hadn't known the Nasty Boys. I first met them in 1987, right after I went to work for Vern Gagne. They were working for Vern Gagne at the same time. They were like the first wrestlers I ever hung out with, which probably explains a lot. At least explains my liver and my gray hair. But they were a contribution. The Nasty Boys were very popular in New Japan and worked regularly over in Japan. So that was another thing that made it easy for me to transition into doing business with New Japan. So they had value. Brutus the Barber Beefcake and Honky Tonk Man, not so much.
Well, because I was going to ask you, because one of the famous examples is Hacksaw Jim Duggan beat Steve Austin for the US title. And when I was going to ask you about the mid-carders in WCW. How were they feeling? Was there any reaction from them seeing nostalgia acts come in? Did they feel threatened? Because obviously Steve Austin has been quite public about his displeasure at that point with maybe dropping the belt to Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
Yeah, I didn't book that. I think Dusty may have been the booker at that time. Could have been Ric Flair. Not really sure. It's hard for me to. It's been a minute. I remember Steve coming up to me one night, and this was before I was the head of creative, or the booker, as it's referred to sometimes. Steve Austin came up to me one time. We're still taping shows at the Center Stage Theater in downtown Atlanta for our WCW Saturday Night Show, which at that time, this was before Nitro. At the time, that was our kind of flagship show. And Steve Austin came up to me, and this was right after Hulk Hogan got there. He said, "Eric, I got this great idea. I'm going to be Hulk Hogan's little brother. We can be a tag team, and then I'll turn on him," or something like that. I went, wow. But I wasn't the head of creative at the time. I said, well, let me pass that on, and we'll see where that goes. Now, I knew in my mind, because one of the things when Hulk Hogan came in, you mentioned Ric Flair, and as I talked about, Hulk was very big on working with people that he trusted. One of the reasons that Ric Flair was so instrumental in allowing us to bring Hulk Hogan in is that Hulk Hogan really trusted Ric Flair inside of the ring. He really knew that once that bell rang, that Ric Flair would do everything in his ability, which was a lot, to make Hulk Hogan look great. Hulk didn't know Steve Austin. There was no way Hulk was going to get into the ring with Steve Austin anytime in the immediate future. So Steve Austin pitches the idea to me. I took it to whoever I took it to. I think it might have been Dusty, or whoever it was, Dusty or Rick, decided, we're going to have Steve Austin lose to Hacksaw Jim Duggan. That was probably the tipping point for Steve Austin. As far as the rest of the locker room, I would say it was split down the middle. You know, a lot of the people that were in WCW at the time had formerly worked for WWE when Hulk Hogan was there, a number of them. They knew that where Hulk Hogan went, the money followed. They wanted to be a part of that. So I would say it was maybe not 50-50, but I would say there was probably 60% of the people were afraid for their jobs, afraid for their position, because not only because of Hulk, because of the people that Hulk was bringing in, but the other 40% were like, you know, this could be really good business for us in the future. They were supportive.
You know, Hulk Hogan comes in, he has the big program with Ric Flair. Then the following year, he has the big program with Vader. But in between there is a big question mark, and that question mark is the main event of Starrcade '94, where Hulk Hogan is booked to face his good friend Brutus the Barber Beefcake as the Butcher in the main event. And
thanks for bringing that up. I was having a blast. Once the plane left the tarmac and we were actually heading down the runway, I was in a great mood until just now.
Because I think if people look at that on paper, they go, "What the f*** was he thinking?" But what was the idea? What was the idea behind Beefcake getting such a big role in that pay-per-view?
Well, no, I'm trying to think back. I think there were two things. One is Hulk wasn't convinced that he wanted to work with Vader. Vader was a basket case, just so you know. He was a big bully. He could be the nicest guy in the world, and oftentimes he was. He was a big, gentle teddy bear until he wasn't. And when he wasn't, he was a big 350-pound bully and treated people very badly. And you were never really sure which Vader you were going to get on any given day. That's why we had Harley Race managing him, because Harley Race was the only person that Vader was genuinely afraid of. No, he was. He was. And that's why Harley was Vader's manager. He literally was able to control Vader more than any the rest of the creative team could. Hulk wasn't convinced at that point that he wanted to work with Vader. Hulk owed us 4 pay-per-views a year. That was his initial contract. And we had a Hulk Hogan pay-per-view that we had to do. And since he wasn't convinced that Vader was right at that point, he'd already worked with Ric Flair. He went with somebody that he knew he could trust. And he could trust Brutus the Barber Beefcake. He just couldn't trust him to have a decent match.
I think you gave Beefcake or WCW gave Beefcake 6 different gimmicks in 5 years.
He couldn't get one of them over. It's like, come on, just the odds. Like simple math should work in your favor at some point in time, right? That's how much Brutus the Barber Beefcake sucked. Yes, Brutus, I'm gonna say it till the day I die. By the way, in case you didn't hear me on that camera, I'm gonna say it till the day I die. By the way, before we go any further, I want to thank Kenny and everybody at Inside the Ropes, because this is going to be my last tour of the UK. Ireland. One more time. All right. This is going to be my last tour, and I'm really grateful that we're kicking it off here in Cork. It's going to be great. And my wife is here. She's back there somewhere going, what did I do? Why did I marry that guy? She'll be signing autographs later. Mrs. B is becoming far more popular than I. She may be touring Ireland next time, and I'll be back there watching. Who knows? But thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
And with the right build, she could probably main event a pay-per-view better than Brutus the Barber Beefcake. So,
I guarantee it. I guarantee it.
So 1995 was a tough year for wrestling generally. The WWF was really struggling, and in WCW, Hogan starts feuding with the Dungeon of Doom, which if I need to get out of the way.
Hold on.
So we've got Kamala, we've got Earthquake, Shark, or Avalanche. And it feels like this is almost like you have to go 2 steps back to get a step forward or something, because it felt like the ideas had run out of who Hogan was going to work with before the NWO idea comes in. So I'm just curious from your perspective, when the Dungeon of Doom stuff is happening, are you internally thinking, we've got to shake things up, something's got to change?
There was an awareness that Hulk Hogan, the character Hulk Hogan, wasn't working. It wasn't bad, it just wasn't good. And as an example, when we would shoot our TV at Center Stage in Atlanta, and you have to remember this is before Nitro. This is before Nitro. Center Stage was an old theater in the round that had a capacity of about 350 people, right? The ring is in the center. And it was a really cool, aesthetically, it was a very cool venue because even though it only held about 350 people, and I may be exaggerating a little bit on that, but the seats were scaled up in such a way that it looked like a wall of people almost 360 degrees around the ring. So the camera kind of liked that perspective. It looked pretty interesting on TV. It looked a lot better than having, say, 250 people where it wasn't scaled up, if you know what I mean. But again, when Hulk Hogan first showed up, the place went nuts. Everybody's excited. But after about 2 or 3 months, yay, Hulk. Just the energy wasn't there. And I remember, and this is early in my relationship with Hulk, and certainly early in my role as a manager and management in WCW. And I remember thinking, this is, on the business side, it's working because all of our pay-per-view partners, advertisers, sponsors, everybody was excited about having Hulk, but the audience wasn't as excited as we hoped they would be. And I remember a couple times being backstage, and I'd be with Hulk right before he came through the curtain, kind of like I almost tripped over. And before he'd go out, we'd be talking, he'd be getting himself psyched up, and he'd go through that curtain, and it was disappointing. I knew it, and I know he knew it because he was used to getting that big positive reaction. So there was a period of time before Nitro where I won't say we were feeling desperate, but we were certainly aware that we were running on a runway with Hulk.
You've told the story a million times about getting Scott Hall, getting Kevin Nash. Talk to us kind of in detail about convincing Hulk to be the third guy, because maybe in some ways he knew that was maybe the way out of this predicament that he was in.
That's really it's fascinating. I didn't convince Hulk of anything. Hulk convinced me that he wanted to be the third guy. And let me tell you this story because it's really fascinating. Hulk, like I told you earlier, Hulk only owed us 4 pay-per-views a year. We'd done 2. I don't remember, probably Super Brawl and another one, whatever it was. So we didn't have any more pay-per-views on our schedule for Hulk Hogan until probably Fall Brawl and Starrcade. So there was going to be a period throughout the summer where we weren't going to use Hulk. And part of the reason for that is summertime for us in WCW at that time was the worst time of year to do a pay-per-view. People are on summer vacation, they're traveling, they're busy doing things. It's not a great time of the year for high-power pay-per-views. So we structured his 4 pay-per-views to do 2 of them in the winter and the spring, and then 2 of them in the fall and winter. So summer basically had Hulk was off. So Hulk was off, let me back up. So Scott Hall shows up May 27th, 1996. I know it was May 27th because it was my birthday. And I had to pick him up at the airport and drive him down to Macon, Georgia. And we had a nice chat on the way down to Macon because I had heard about Scott's reputation and I was a little concerned. But anyway, we get down to Macon, Georgia. Scott Hall comes down. He does his thing. Hulk Hogan is off doing a movie called Santa with Muscles. Raise your hand if you've ever seen Santa with Muscles. Are you shitting me? How the f*** did you find that? So he's off doing this movie called Santa with Muscles, right? Scott Hall comes in May, comes down through the crowd, does his thing. Following week, I think it was, Kevin Nash comes down and says, we got a third guy. Well, by that time, I had the idea. It was a rough idea, too. I don't want anybody to think that I had it all laid out. I just had basically a sketch on a piece of paper of the idea for the NWO. It wasn't even on paper. It was in my head, to be honest. I knew I wanted that invasion angle and that feeling. And I wanted a story with mystery. I wanted who's the third man going to be? I really wanted that mystery because I knew if I could get people talking about it, I could create a buzz. And if I could create a buzz, I could create interest. And if I create interest, I could create cash, much like controversy. So we did the whole who's the third man thing. Now that story played out over the course of about 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. Who's the third man? Who's the third man? I had convinced Steve Borden, to turn heel and be the third man. Because a year before, I know I'm taking you guys all over this timeline, and I apologize if I confuse you, but a year before the NWO, and a year before Scott Hall came down, and a year before Kevin Nash, teased who's the third man, I had flown to Hulk Hogan's house, and because as we were talking about, we all knew the Hulk Hogan red and yellow, it wasn't working. He knew it, I knew it, everybody knew it. Somebody had to say something. That was my job. So I flew myself down to Hulk's, went to his house. I remember it was during the week. It was like a Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday afternoon. Got to his house about 1:30. Sat down. He had a case of beer waiting for me. We both liked to drink beer at the time. Excuse me. So I got to Hulk's house, and he takes me into his office. He's a big, beautiful 15,000 square foot home. Sit down in his office, and we start talking, and I pitched it. I said, Hulk, I got this idea. It really wasn't an idea. It was a half-assed idea. But I said, what if we turn you heel? Hulk sits back in his chair. He got that big-ass Fu Manchu. And when you see him do this, when he curls those lips up like he just ate something that tastes like and he strokes that Fu Manchu, you don't want to be around for what's next. He's stroking him. He's nodding his head. He leans forward, looks at his watch, said, brother, you'll never understand until you walk a mile in my red and yellow boots. And I got to go pick my kids up from school, so thanks for coming down. Let's go. And literally, as elegantly as I've ever been thrown out of anything or anywhere, elegantly invited me to leave, told me I could take the beer with me, by the way, which I did, just so you know. And I was gone. That was it. He did not want to have a conversation, not a syllable of a conversation about turning heel. That was 1 year earlier, 1 year prior to Scott Hall coming down. Okay, backtrack again. Scott Hall comes out. Kevin Nash shows up. Hulk Hogan's up doing a horrible freaking movie called Santa with Muscles. Had a budget of about $85,000, whatever it was. It's horrible. But anyway, it's a movie that's being filmed in California, and it's way up in the mountains. So it looked like the North Pole or something, like giant pine trees and stuff. It's supposed to look like a forest. So Hulk calls me up. This is after Kevin Nash showed up. Now we've teased the third guy. I've convinced Sting, which was not easy, by the way. It took me maybe a month or so of convincing, selling. But Sting's in. He's ready to go. I've got my idea. Everything's in place. I got a game plan. I get a phone call from Hulk. Hey, brother, any chance you could come out to California so we can talk about where I'm going to go for the rest of the year? I said, sure, not a problem. So I jumped on a plane, flew out to California, got in a town car, headed up the mountain. Took about 8 hours to get there. It's midnight by the time I get to his movie set. I get to his, because he was locked out. He couldn't leave. And it was very, very isolated. So I get to his trailer And I'm beat. I flew from Atlanta to L.A. and drove for 3 or 4 hours, whatever it was, to get to the movie set. I get to his trailer, and he's sitting back in his trailer, and he's got a case of beer on ice, and he's got a box of Cuban cigars, and he's smoking one of them. I walk in, hey, brother, good to see you. We hug, whatever. Here's a beer. Sit down. We shoot the for a few minutes. Then he leans forward, starts stroking that Fu Manchu. I'm thinking, now what? So, who's the third man? It's not what I expected. I didn't want to tell him. It's not that I didn't trust him. Well, let me be clear. I didn't think he would maliciously or intentionally spill the beans, divulge anything, but Hulk he's like any of us. He gets excited about something, he can't wait to talk about it. And sometimes his judgment, like he'll talk about something because he'll think he's in a room full of people he can trust, and chances are you can't. Somebody's going to say something either because they're stupid and they don't know any better, or because they're just excited and they can't wait to share it. That's human nature. I've done that myself a lot of times, by the way. I'm guilty of what I'm suggesting I was afraid Hulk might do, which is why I didn't want to tell him. But I can't say, sorry, Hulk, I'm not telling you. It's a secret. Not telling you. I couldn't do that. So I'm thinking on my feet, actually on my ass drinking a beer, but I said, who do you think it should be? Excusez-moi. So I did what most politicians do when they're confronted with a question they don't want to answer. They answer it with a question. And I said, who do you think it should be, Hulk? And he leaned forward again. He said, you're looking at him. Oh, that'll work. And it was really, I'm having fun with it a little bit, but I'm about 70% right on the money with the way I just described that scene to you. Might have been a little different, might have taken a little bit longer, but that was essentially the conversation. Jimmy Hart had been sending Hulk VHS tapes, if you can believe it. That's what we had back then. But every Monday night, Jimmy would FedEx these tapes to Hulk, and he would get them and he'd watch them so he could keep track of what was going on in the shows. And when he saw Scott Hall come down, that got his attention. Then he saw Kevin Nash come down. Then it's confronting me and we got a third guy. It's like he convinced me. I didn't have to convince him. Keep in mind that I had spent a month convincing Steve Borden, a.k.a. Sting, to make this dramatic move and how great it was going to be for his career and how much confidence I had. And we were pretty good friends at that point in time anyway. And we stayed close. Steve Borden is a great guy. But I had worked really hard to convince Sting to turn heel and be that third man. And now I got Hulk saying, I think I'm going to do that. And I'm all excited about it until I sobered up the next morning and got on a plane and went, fuck. Now I got to call Sting and say, sorry, deal's off. But he handled it well.
I mean, this is an impossible question to ask, but I'm just going to ask it. If Hogan hadn't said yes and Sting was the third guy, do you think it would have had half the impact that it did?
No. Honest, it would have been great. The quality of the story would have been just as good, but the impact wouldn't have been half. Hulk Hogan had been known worldwide for a decade and a half at that point. He was the largest name in professional wrestling history at that point, but he had always been a good guy. there was nobody out there of that magnitude as far as awareness and recognizability and just relationship with the wrestling audience that had been a babyface 100% of the time for the most part. Take out 6 months or so into his early career, but for the most part, as far as the world knew, he was just this ultimate babyface. And it was that, because what Hulk did is he betrayed. You know, betrayal is like one of the most powerful elements in any story, right? I'm reading a book, and I've been reading it now for about 2 years, but it's the 7 basic plots. There are really only 7 basic stories that have ever been told since the time that people sat in caves and drew pictures of the hunt with the sticks that they had in the fire on the walls of a cave. The stories are essentially the same. And betrayal is one of the key elements of so many of those stories. And what Hulk Hogan did when he turned heel is he betrayed the wrestling audience that loved him for as long as they did and believed in him. Sting couldn't have done that. He could have executed it better. He could have carried it in many ways better because he was more physically able and gifted at that point. But it would have never had the impact of Hulk Hogan turning heel. There were people, when he dropped that leg on Randy, I remember I was sitting up in the cheap seats. I wanted to see it from the fans' perspective. I didn't want to see it on the monitor in the back or sitting in a production truck, because you're separated, you're distanced from the real emotion when you're in a truck or you're looking on a little monitor. It's not real. I wanted to go out in the audience and feel it. So I went way up in the stands where nobody would recognize me and had a hat pulled down over my head, and I'm up there. And when Hulk Hogan dropped that leg, I watched that, but I immediately shifted my focus to the audience because I wanted to see how the audience was going to react. And they went from, if you go back and watch the tape, Hogan drops the leg. He comes out. Everybody's, hey, Hulk Hogan, he's here to save the day, because that was the formula. That's what people were used to seeing. And then when he dropped that leg on Randy, for the first 20 seconds, nobody reacted. And then when they did, it was like, oh my God. And then it turned into hate. They got pissed. And that's when I went, oh, this is so good. This is so good. I don't know if y'all have Blue Chew here, but I had the wrestling version of Blue Chew going on. I was like, bang, this is awesome.
I did want to. It just came into my mind. So some people have kind of criticised Bobby Heenan on commentary for when Hogan comes down saying, "Whose side is he on?" When you heard him say that line, did you think it fit the story, or did you?
I didn't know, because I was I couldn't hear anything. All I could hear was people screaming down below.
I mean, when you heard it later, what was your opinion of that line?
Later, I heard it, like 2 or 3 days later, I heard it, and I didn't care. Keep in mind, I believed, right or wrong, and I think mostly correctly, that you don't want to prep your announcers too much. Your play-by-play and color guys, color commentary team, should be reacting to what they see just like you would, or just like you would, or just like you would if you were sitting at ringside. They are the voice of the audience. Sometimes when your play-by-play announcer or your color commentator is aware of where stories are going and what's going to happen, they don't mean to do it. It's subconscious. Sometimes it's intentional, but more often than not, it's just subconscious. But they start telegraphing. And in order to maintain their credibility, they don't want to look stupid. They don't want to look too surprised. They want to look like they know what's going on. And again, I'm not being critical. It's human nature. And I've done that job, and I know that because I've done it myself. But as a result of my desire to get a real, authentic reaction from my play-by-play and color guys, I wouldn't tell. You get a format. You know what the matches are. Call the action. Don't telegraph it. Don't try to become Shakespeare. Don't try to get yourself over. just sit there and tell me what you see if you're the play-by-play guy. And if you're the color commentator, tell me why what we see happening is happening. Put me inside of the mind of the wrestler. That's why I always liked ex-wrestlers as color commentators, more so than just broadcasters, because a former wrestler can, if they're good at it, can artfully tell you why Kenny is deciding to reach into his tights and pull out brass knucks, right? Not say, oh, Kenny's reaching his tights, pull out brass knucks. He's a jackass. He's a bad guy. No. Tell me why. Why is he desperate in that particular moment? Why did he wait till just now to pull out those brass knuckles? Why does he feel like he can't beat Eric Bischoff unless he uses brass knuckles? That's the art of painting a picture and telling a story. But if you give too much information to your play-by-play and your color commentator, they will start crafting a story before it happens. They don't even know they're doing it. As a result, I didn't tell anybody. They just called it. Now, that's an important note. Here's the next important note with regard to Bobby Heenan. If you go back and you watch any of the Hulk Hogan matches where Bobby Heenan was the color commentator in WCW, and probably even beforehand in WWE, Bobby Heenan always hated Hulk Hogan. He always characterized or put Hulk Hogan in the worst possible context. So Bobby didn't know that Hulk Hogan was going to drop that leg and turn heel. Bobby just assumed that Hulk Hogan was coming out to save the day, and Bobby Heenan was the heel announcer, so he's going to take the other side and doubt him and question him. It just so happened that this time he was right. The previous 7 or 8 years he had been doing it, it was just part of the game, part of the game. But now it just happened to be right because he didn't know. Had I told Bobby, be careful what you say here because Hulk Hogan's going to turn heel, he wouldn't have done it. Bobby was a pro's pro. He really, really was one of the best there'll ever be. There'll never be another Bobby Heenan, ever. But he didn't know, and that was because I didn't tell him.
So Hogan turns heel, he joins the NWO, and then at the end of 96 or the end of 97, his contract's up. You have to renegotiate with him. Do you think he spoke to Vince McMahon?
I know he did.
So
I was with him. Not in the meeting with Vince, but we were in Denver. We had a show in Denver, a Nitro in Denver, and I had gotten together with Hall. I think probably during the show, because we shared a locker room, the dressing room, and we were riffing, probably drinking a beer before the show, and he said, "Hey man, I just want to let you know because you're going to probably hear about it anyway. I'm going to meet with Vince. Called me and wants to meet me after Nitro." Vince flew to Denver and stayed at a hotel in Denver, waiting for Hulk to get done with Nitro so they could have a meeting around midnight. And Hulk told me, because I'm going to meet with him. I said, cool. Because I don't think anything's going to come of it. I'll keep you posted. I said, great. Had another couple beers. He did the show. He went his way. I went back to the hotel. And next morning we got together for breakfast or whatever it was. Maybe we flew back together. I don't remember. I said, how'd it go? He goes, same old, same old. I wasn't worried. The fact that he told me that he was going to meet with Vince told me that he wasn't going to do a deal. Because if he was thinking about doing a deal, he wouldn't have told me.
And do you think he knew if he went back it would be old hat, or do you think it was the money that kept him? Or
no, it wasn't a money issue. It was a Vince. Hulk and Vince to this day have the strangest love-hate relationship of anybody I've ever met. It's bizarre. But it wasn't the money. It's Hulk. I'm speaking out of school here a little bit, but my impression, just my impression, not a fact, it's just my impression, having spent a significant amount of time discussing the subject. But the conflict between Hulk and Vince, in my opinion, from Hulk's perspective is, Hulk felt like he should have been Vince's business partner. Hulk really believed that the two were Hulk couldn't have done it without Vince, but Vince couldn't have done it without Hulk. Hulk moved up to Connecticut, and if you know Hulk Hogan, for Hulk Hogan to pick up and move from Florida to frickin' Connecticut is a massive, massive seismic shift. But he did it, and he did it thinking that Vince would at least offer him part of the company, because Hulk was so responsible for the growth, the accelerated growth in the WWF at the time. And Vince flat out told him, no, you're not a part of my family. You'll never own a piece of this company. They love each other to this day. I'm sure they do. I know they do. But that sticking point will never, ever go away. And that's why I didn't think he'd ever go back. It wasn't the money. Hulk, when I hired Hulk, he had, I'm not going to say the number, but it was tens of millions of dollars in cash with no bills, no debt, house paid for, everything he owned was paid for. He had tens of millions of dollars in the bank. He didn't need the money. And he also didn't want to work 250 or 300 days out of the year, which is another big factor, because he knew if you go back to WWE, you're Hulk Hogan, you're going to be on the road a lot. When you're not in the ring, you're going to be meeting with pay-per-view companies and advertisers and Make-A-Wish Foundation and this and that. The work in the ring was the easy part. The hard part was the stuff you're doing outside of the ring. And that was another reason I wasn't too worried about it.
So, the NWO, if that's your greatest story that you're attributed to in wrestling, maybe your second one is Sting and the rise of Crow Sting and that whole year story. And I feel like if you were to ask anybody, lay out that story, they go, well, he beats Hogan in the end. That's the end. So we get to Starrcade 97. There's the convoluted finish. Can you talk about, from your perspective, what was going to happen compared to what did happen and why?
In case you couldn't hear the back, the gentleman up here said, "It doesn't work for me, brother," which I heard a lot. That phrase is a phrase that will ricochet around inside of my skull for a long, long time. But here, I'm hesitating because I have a lot of affection and respect for Steve Borden. Most of this is Steve Borden's story to tell and not my story to tell. So I'm going to lay it out to you in a way that hopefully you'll understand and appreciate why I'm dancing around a direct answer. Steve Borden, and notice I'm separating Sting the character from Steve Borden the person. Steve Borden the person, and then the reason I'm comfortable saying this is because I've seen him on tape acknowledging some of this. So I'm not telling you anything that Steve hasn't already acknowledged publicly. But there was a period in time, 96, 97, where Steve Borden was going through some intense personal issues. Now, at the same time, Steve Borden was the Crow character. The Crow character didn't work in the ring. The Crow character didn't really talk that much. The Crow character just hung around up in the rafters with a vulture on his shoulder. It looked spooky as shit. Scared everybody to death. Pointed his bat, right? He did that for over a year before we heard him say a word. And during that time, Steve Borden was dealing with a lot of personal issues. So we fast forward, now we come to Starrcade. What was the original plan? The original plan was Sting was going to put an end to Hulk Hogan, WCW was going to get their company back, the NWO was going to be on their heels, so to speak. They were going to be backing up. WCW's on top, and now it's time for NWO to figure out a way to rise again. That was kind of like the ebb and flow of the story. But there were personal issues involved, and when we got to Washington, D.C., plan was, when I landed in Washington, when Hulk landed in Washington, when Sting landed in Washington, that night before or that morning, the plan was for Sting to beat Hulk Hogan. Clean. No fast counts, no just 1, 2, 3, middle of the ring. after all this time, and then Sting was going to be the superhero once again. The mantle that he formerly held as the Crow Sting character, or the flat top Sting, surfer Sting character. Now he was going to shed that Crow character and be the babyface he had previously been. But when we all got together that afternoon, there was doubt. There was concern about where Steve Borden's head was at. And then it kind of cascaded from there. And it was like, that doesn't work for me, brother. Because of that doubt. Could have been, look, truth is, it would have worked. Sting would have come through. It would have been just fine. But it was one of those issues. You know, chemistry matters, folks. Chemistry really matters. And when the chemistry isn't right and there's insecurity or a lack of confidence, things can go south pretty quick, as it did that night.
And I mean, from your perspective, when that all happens, is there part of you that's thinking, but surely we just finish this bit the way we're gonna, and then move on? Or is it a case of Hulk's got creative control and it's easier to keep him happy?
You know, I was like, I'm the referee. I was trying to guide the conversation. I was trying to find solutions. I was trying to, you know, I knew Hulk pretty well by that point. I was able, most of the time, to do a pretty good job of managing where his head was at. But he was dug in pretty stiff. And now it's just a matter of, as they say in the wrestling business, how do we make chicken salad out of chicken? How do we make this, how do we get through this and make it as palatable as it can be? But it was a compromise. You know, we had a really great story. It was black, it was white, it was a good guy, it was a bad guy, it was a resolution. It was an arc that took over a year, almost a year and a half to play itself out. It was set up perfectly until about 3 o'clock that afternoon, and it all went to.
So did Hulk originally say, I'm not losing to him, and you got him to the compromise of what we saw? Or was he willing to do what we saw?
It was more of a, you know, the issue revealed itself probably around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The show was at 8. So we had about 5-6 hours to figure out what we wanted to do. Once it became clear that we weren't going to go with plan A, Kevin Sullivan got involved, different people got involved. It ended up being more of a collaboration amongst 4, 5, 6 people until everybody finally ended up with the cluster that we saw.
Was it important to you, though, for it to not be Hogan wins at the end of that night? For the story?
For the story, Sting should have won clean. That was what was important to me, but that wasn't going to happen. It had to be a muddy finish.
I mean, you know, talking about the muddy finish, then we have Bret Hart kind of being involved, but the execution of it kind of makes Bret look like he's got involved in something that's kind of already sorted. I mean, how did something go wrong? Like, why did that end up looking like it did?
Because nobody was communicating. You got 4 or 5 people involved, and not everybody agreed 100% with the finish, the way they wanted to do it. And if you go back and look at the tape very closely, there was supposed to be a fast count. Sting never got his shoulders up. It fell apart so badly and so fast because of lack of communication. And I said, oh God, where did I say this? I said this recently. I was watching something, and it's like, oh, it was on an episode of 83 Weeks. And Conrad and I were watching a Nitro back, and the finish was so convoluted and complicated that the fans can't. It's too nuanced, and there was just too many involved. You know, there's a saying, you know, a camel is a horse created by committee, and That's what that finish was. It was a camel. It ended up being a camel that started out as a horse that was created by a committee of people that weren't really doing a good job communicating. And honestly, Steve Borden bears some responsibility because he missed a kick out when he should have rolled a shoulder when he was supposed to, and he didn't. And that's one of the things that made Brett look so bad.
And how do you, as the guy in charge, and you've got to deal with Hulk, who ultimately has creative control over what he does, other characters like Hall and Nash, who I'm assuming had their say in stuff that happened in WCW or their influence. How do you deal with that while still maintaining the idea that, I'm in charge, this is the direction, without it kind of falling off the rails?
It's hard. It's always hard. For me, I just tended to be pretty honest. If you talk to Kevin Nash, he'll tell you that he and I had some brutal you more. Well, I'll you up is what I mean, we've had some brutal back and forths. And then we'd get down to arguing like two old and then we'd just go have a beer, settle it, and laugh about it and tell jokes. But everybody was different. I never really had an issue with Scott Hall. Not in that regard. Scott just, whoa, whatever, dude. You tell me what to do, I'll do it. Point me in the right direction, bro. We're good. Kevin was tough. Kevin would blow up and exert his influence. You just get through it. And for a while, I felt like, man, this is a weakness in my game. I'm not really good at this. And then working in WWE and working with some of the people in WWE and finding out that same thing happened to Vince McMahon. Same thing happens to directors on movies, directors on television series. You've got talent that wants one thing, you've got a director or a studio that wants another, and there's going to be a pissing contest. So you just have to get through it.
So one of the biggest moments from WCW that still gets replayed today is Goldberg beating Hogan on Nitro. Mm-hmm. And there's some people say, well, that should have been on pay-per-view, or not. What was, talk about the decision behind doing that or how it came about, and do you, in hindsight, stand by the fact that it was on Nitro?
In hindsight, I would do it again and again and again and again on Nitro for one reason and one reason only. I worked for this guy by the name of Ted Turner. Ted Turner, when I was hired, told me, Eric, actually it was Bill Shaw, not Ted Turner, but it was Bill Shaw speaking for Ted Turner. Eric, this is not a wrestling company. This is a television company. We want you to be profitable, but keep in mind, this is a television product, not a wrestling product. In July of 1998, we were printing money. Every year at WCW, every division in Turner Broadcasting, in the fall of the previous year, so in the fall of 97, I would have had to put forth a budget and a forecast. And I would have to submit that to Turner Finance, not WCW Finance, Turner Broadcasting Finance. And Turner Broadcasting Finance would have to sign off on that budget and approve it, because all of the money that I was to receive for the following year to operate my company was based upon that forecast. So in 97, I produced my financials, had them approved, was allocated a budget based on that forecast and that plan. By July of 1998, I had exceeded that forecast by probably 40 or 50%. I blew my own forecast out of the water. We're literally making more money than anybody in Turner Broadcasting thought possible at that time. So knowing that I have no need to continue to over-deliver. What I have to do is satisfy the people that I work for, and they're a television company. So I'm driving down the highway. I remember exactly where I was. Our daughter lives in Marina Del Rey, California, and I was right in here where she lives, probably about a mile away. I was driving down the road, my phone rings, and it's Hulk Hogan. He goes, hey, brother, I got an idea. Sure, what do you got? He goes, I want you to book me and Goldberg at the Georgia Dome. Main event. I'm going to put him over. The f***? Are you kidding me? Say that again? No, brother, I'm serious. I'm going to wrestle Goldberg, main event, and I'm going to put him over clean. Okay, let's do that. And there was no, well, wait, maybe I should put this on the paper because I know this sounds horrible, but again, context is king. I didn't need to make 58% more than I was budgeted to make. I was already there financially, but I knew that putting that match on television was a way for us to reestablish our prominence because we had been beating WWE for weeks and weeks and weeks, almost 83 of them, I think. just plugging. But it wasn't a decision that was driven by finance. It was a decision that was driven by what's best for the television product. And that's what my job was.
So, in the spirit of keeping you in a good mood, let's talk about The Warrior in 1998. What the f*** were you? No, I'm kidding. So, it was a 17-minute diatribe that he does. But when he comes, because there is the story that people think, and the way this relates to Hogan, is that Hogan wanted his win back from WrestleMania 6, so he asks you to hire The Warrior.
That's not true.
But so Warrior, I think, had negotiated with Vince McMahon again in 1997. It never happened. I think a leaked agreement proposal is on the internet and stuff. But talk about your perspective, August of 1998, bringing him in, and just what happened?
So you didn't like it?
I just don't understand it. I've watched that promo a few times to try and see. Maybe you need to be on something to understand it.
No, I've tried. It doesn't work. You could go down the list alphabetically. I don't think there's anything you can. But so let me just start out with what was I thinking. And again, you have to at least try for the moment to put yourself in my shoes. Number one, I was learning on the job. I had never been in a creative position. I had been in sales, syndication, sponsorship development, production. I was a talent. I had been involved in a lot of things in the wrestling business, but being involved in creative was now one of them up until about 1995, 96. And even then, when I got involved in creative, I was kind of hesitant because I didn't have a lot of self-confidence. I was learning. I don't know how to do this. I'm in the room. I'm going to listen to everybody else that knows how to do it and try to figure it out. It's kind of the role that I put myself in. I put people in positions based on them having more experience than me. Dusty, Ric Flair, Kevin Sullivan. But by this time, I was getting a little bit more comfortable and I was taking a more active role in making creative decisions. Keep in mind, when I brought Hulk Hogan in, the Dave Meltzers of the world and the people like him and the people that read all this, oh, Hulk Hogan's old, he's washed up, the steroid trial, that'll never work, it's bullshit. WCW is going to blow up. They're going to go bankrupt. Blah 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 blah. Well, Hulk Hogan comes along, and about 12 months later, we're beating the out of WWE. Huh. All right. And then Randy Savage is available. Same thing. Oh, Randy Savage is washed up. He's too old. It's the geriatric society in WCW. It's never going to work. Oh my God, we need younger talent, not older talent. Randy Savage goes through the roof. So I'm thinking, all of the criticism that I read and the opinions that I hear from people inside WCW who felt that way as well, who did have experience, tended to be pretty wrong. So I thought, I'm going to keep kind of going with my gut instead of listening to people around me as much as I have been. Then Warrior comes available. he reaches out to me. I think I don't know how it happened. I was living in Atlanta. My wife and I were living in Atlanta, and our kids at the time. And I flew out to Phoenix, and I met Jim Hellwig.
I think he was legally Warrior by that point.
Yes. I still called him Jim, but I met him at a really nice resort hotel in Scottsdale. Beautiful time of year. We sat outside, and I actually really found him to be fascinating. We had like a 3-hour dinner, and I listened, and he talked. And quirky, eccentric, like he was out there, but he was pretty interesting. And I have this thing, I didn't make it up, but I repeat it and make it sound like I did. You can slow a fast horse down, but it's really hard to speed a slow horse up, right? I never minded working with fast horses. Yeah, they're crazy, they're hard to deal with, their personalities are big, they're eccentric, they're emotional. I surrounded myself with people like that, from Ric Flair to Roddy Piper to Hulk Hogan to Randy Savage to Kevin Nash. I was surrounded by psychopaths most of the time, but they were really good at what they did. And I kept reminding myself that, yeah, they're a pain in the ass. I wouldn't want to hang out with them necessarily. They're driving me crazy. They're making me drink more than I should, but they're really good at what they do. So when I went and had dinner with Warrior, he fell into that category. And I thought, you know what? Based on the success I've had with Randy, the success I've had with Hulk, obviously, I got to give it a shot. I got to see. It wasn't Hulk wanting to get his win back. That's like Dave Meltzer nonsense. It was more about, okay, there's this character by the name of the Ultimate Warrior that the audience worldwide was very, very familiar with and did great business. And it's been some time, and now we can perhaps recreate that magic just like we did with Hulk, just like we did with Randy. Why not try it? So that's why I pulled the trigger, so to speak, on Warrior. Now let's talk about that 17-minute promo. It was supposed to be 5 minutes because we had commercials. You have this thing with TV, live TV. It's called commercial breaks. It's how you pay for everything. So we laid this promo out backstage. Oh, I love you. We laid Warrior's promo out backstage. We walked through it because we didn't work off scripts, right? You just bullet points. We had a basic idea of what we were going to do, and we had a pretty good idea of how long that should take. And that's the one thing back at that point in time. Guys like Randy and Roddy, and Roddy could go, he could go off too, but everybody, if they were motivated, could hit their times pretty close. You just had a clock inside of your head. If somebody said to me, Eric, you got 3 minutes, I want you to go out and, sell me that glass of beer, and you got 3 minutes to do it, I'll do it in 3 minutes. Maybe 2:58, maybe 3:05, but I'm going to come within seconds of hitting my time just because I got really used to having that clock in my head. And a lot of people that came up in that era of the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s, you had to develop that skill or you wouldn't reach the top of your game. So anyway, we lay it all out backstage. Everybody's nodding their head like the Warriors. Yeah. That's kind of what it was, right? Go back and watch the tape. I'm not lying. So we go out, and I'm standing in the ring. It's just like a dream that you've had when you were little, and you still remember that nightmare. But I'm standing out there in the ring, and he's going on and on and on, and none of it makes any sense. It's the wackiest ever. Nuts. 17 minutes, it felt like it had to be 25. You must have seen the edited version. Because the live version went on and on. I remember, literally, if you go back and look at it, I'm looking at Hulk, what the can you just knock him out? Can we just shoot an angle right here, right now? Throw everything. I mean, it was the most horrible feeling. And our director, his name is Craig Leathers. He's a super guy, very talented director, and always calm and cool. You could never rattle him. No matter what happened, he'd come out of that truck after the show and go, "Yeah, we got it done. It's pretty good." He came out of that truck, his hair was on fire. One eye bulged out, the other one was still in the socket. It was horrible.
So that was, I think that was like August 17th, 1998, because the PTSD's there from that promo. And then he does the Fall Brawl War Games match. He does the Halloween Havoc match with Hogan and loses, and then he's gone. So how does it? I mean, was it so bad that you were just like, please leave? I will pay you to not come back. Like, what happened? Why was it so short?
I think he blew out a bicep. He was hanging. I think it was Fall Brawl, War Games, and he jumped up on top of the cage or got up on one of the bars for the cage and tore out a bicep. And that put him out for like 6 months to a year. Torn bicep isn't something you come back with from anytime soon. And because he had the injury, because everything that we tried to do with him obviously didn't work out, it made it easy for me to call an audible and just make a decision, part ways.
But he does that Fall Brawl match. He still works the Hogan match the following month. When he does the match with Hogan, at the end of it, did you feel like, well, at least we got that out of it? Or by the time that happened?
No, that was like, let's just put it into this. No, seriously. And he knew it. We discussed it. That was going to be the end. There was no, hey, let's just get through this match and see what we're going to do. It was like, can we get you through this match? Yes. Okay, then this experiment is over. He knew what was coming.
If only the One Warrior Nation had lived on longer.
Actually, I kind of dug the One Warrior Nation, the ONW, which is a reverse of NWO. OWN, yeah, One Warrior.
And that also had the disciple, Brutus the Barber Beefcake, as a key member after he was kidnapped.
You come off as such a nice guy when people first meet you.
Stay tuned for the Brutus the Barber Beefcake tour. So
good luck with that, brother.
So before the poor guy. Sorry, Brutus. But you obviously you've talked again loads about when you were told to leave WCW in 1999 September and go home, but like a month before that, Hulk went back to the red and yellow on TV on like a Nitro. He came back. What was the idea behind going back to that? Did you think it would work? And just talk us through that.
I think it was nothing more or less than just desperation, because by that time WCW was just getting hammered competitively by WWE. Internally, Turner Broadcasting was a colossal mess because of the merger, not just for WCW, but for every division within Turner Broadcasting. That merger between Time Warner and AOL, I think even to this day, like if you Googled worst merger in history, no, I'm not kidding you. I challenge you. You can do it while we're sitting here. I'm pretty sure, at least in media, I'm pretty sure that AOL Time Warner merger will go down in history as the worst media merger in the history of media mergers. And it destroyed a lot of divisions within. Look at where CNN is today. CNN is now a punch. It's a punchline. It's a punchline to a bad media joke. But prior to that merger, CNN was the leader in world news and well respected. Not anymore. There were so many examples within Turner Broadcasting of that, and WCW was a victim as well. going back to, 98, when I talked about how we were over delivering in all of our budgeting and forecasts, we were spending less money than we said we would, and we were making more money than we thought we would. Right about that time, actually in August of 1998, I got a call to come to a meeting in a different part of Turner. It was called Techwood at the time. It was the original location of Turner Broadcasting before they built the CNN Center. So I said, sure, I'll come to a meeting. I'm walking on water. I'm touching water and turning it into wine. I'm making money hand over fist. I can do no wrong. I was kind of like the golden child in Turner Broadcasting to a degree. My hair was long and scraggly. I had a half a beard on. I'd ride a Harley to work every once in a while, wear cowboy boots to the office. And I go into this meeting dressed like that, and I'm sitting there. There's about 15 people sitting at this long table that I'd never seen before. Well, a couple of them I knew, but most of them I didn't know. And they all went around the table and they introduced themselves, and they proceeded to tell me what they think I should do to run WCW, how I should change WCW. Keep in mind, I'm over-delivering by leaps and bounds. I'm spending less money than I was allocated, and now they're telling me what I should fix. That was the beginning in August of 98. And I remember I came home and I told Lori, I was ready to quit. I was ready to resign. Peak of my career. I was ready to quit. And I thought, no, I can't quit, because I was loyal to Ted. And I was having fun. We were making great money and everything was good. But my instinct, I went, this is f***ed up. This is not good for WCW. This is going to be bad. But I didn't know how. Fast forward now to 1999, a year later, which is the time frame you're talking about. Turner Corporate had gutted WCW's budget. Even though it was approved a year in advance when we were making plenty of money and we had a lot of success, they were what's called in the finance business intercompany allocations. So they were taking a lot of money that was previously allocated to WCW and they were spinning it off into other divisions that they were trying to protect. So they were using our revenues and spreading it around to make other divisions look good. And this is all for the purposes of the merger, by the way. And taking losses from certain divisions and accruing them to WCW. For example, Turner Home Satellite, which I didn't give a f*** if we did business with them or not. I didn't need them, but we were forced to use them. All of a sudden, their losses are now my losses. That's called an intercompany allocation. It's perfectly legal, by the way. It's called GAAP, or generally accepted accounting principles, but it was devastating to WCW. At that point in time, I was spending 80% of my energy mentally trying to figure out how to fight that problem. Meaning, all of my energy was fighting internal battles, not creative battles, not the WWE, not negotiating contracts, not coming up with good ideas. 80% of my energy was focused on these people were f***ing me over in themselves, actually. But I knew that they didn't want WCW to continue to survive. So rather than using my head and being smart, I did what I've always done most of my life, was just fight and argue. And in my case, I believed incorrectly, but I believed because I had developed and I don't want to mislead people to thinking that Ted Turner and I were good friends and we hung out and had steak and like that. That never happened. But anytime there were serious issues involved and it could not be resolved any other way, it would be me sitting down in front of Ted Turner or somebody that Ted appointed, and I would always win. I get my way. So I'm thinking, well, I'm just going to fight these bastards. They're not going to do this to WCW. They're not going to do this to me. And I'd be picking fights with people that were so far up the food chain, I couldn't see the heels of their feet. I mean, they were just way up there. I'm motherfucking them and calling them names and not to. I remember right before I got sent home, which is another way of saying fired, on September 10th of 1999, on September 9th of 1999, it was a Thursday night. You can go back and look at a calendar. I'm telling you the truth. September 9th, 1999. It was a Thursday evening. I'm in my office. I have this guy in my office by the name of Bill Bush, who I really thought was a confidant and a friend of mine. And I'm just, I'm vomiting these people, and I'm just saying some bad shit. And Bill says, well, Vicki Miller would like a meeting with you next week. Vicki Miller was the executive vice president of Turner Finance. She's like 1.5 notches below Ted. I went, f*** her. If she wants a meeting with me, she can come to me. And Bill went, because Bill worked underneath her. Bill worked for Turner Finance. He actually wasn't my employee because he was actually a finance employee, but he worked with me. It was called a dotted line reporting thing. And he goes, no, you should probably really go meet with her. I'm her. I'm not meeting with her. She wants to meet with me. She could come. She knows where my office is. I got a call September 10th the next morning. I'm on my way to work. It's like any other Friday. I got a pay-per-view that Sunday night. Sunday. I'm on my way to work. I get a phone call. It's Harvey Schiller, my boss. And Harvey never called me, especially early in the morning. Harvey left me alone pretty much. He was a good boss. I liked him a lot. Had a lot of respect for him, still do. Harvey calls me. I'm on my way to work. He goes, where are you at? I said, I'm about 10 minutes out. He goes, come up to my office. I said, well, Harvey, can we do it in the app? Come up to my office. Well, that's weird. But I knew. Because I had told Bill Bush the night before as I was walking out the door, I said, I'm hanging it up. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not doing it. And Bill, I believe, called Vicki Miller and said, just a heads up, Eric's going to quit tomorrow, because that's where my head was at. I came home and I told Lori, I said, I'm done. I'm quitting. Bill Bush called Vicki Miller. Vicki Miller called Harvey Schiller. Harvey Schiller called me Friday morning and said, come on up. And that was that.
But you did get called back. And again, in the spirit of keeping you with a good mood, you got to work with Vince Russo. And Vince Russo, for any of you who read Inside the Ropes magazine, I just think you should know this story. So we set up Finn Martin from Power Slam to talk to Vince Russo for a magazine interview. And they start the interview, and 6 minutes in, Finn argues with Vince about a fact because Vince is lying about something, and Russo hung up on him. So we printed the interview as it is. So that's what he's like in 2023. But back in 2000, you and him are working together. It's a new WCW. There's a reset. It's going to be the Millionaires Club against the New Blood. Going back to Hogan, what is Hulk on board with this idea of kind of trying something new, older guys putting new guys over?
He was. And let me say, when I left in September, well, I didn't leave. I was sent home. I was fired. But I had a contract. I had about 2.5 years left on my contract. And what Turner did when Harvey said, just go home, he didn't fire me because I was still under contract. They kept paying me. And it's why I wasn't really that upset. I mean, it was shocking to me. And I remember coming home that morning, and Lori was surprised to see me. It's the first time that's happened. It's happened since. But I came home, and it was like 11 in the morning. And I walked in, and she's like, what are you doing here? I said, got fired. And we talked about it for a minute or two, and I'm thinking on the way home, I go, well, they can't fire me. They're going to pay me for the next 2.5 years, and I was making a significant amount of money at the time. I don't give a And at the time, I had my own plane. I was a pilot. And I said, I think I'm going to fly out to Wyoming and go fly fishing. She said, yeah, I think you should. And probably within 2 hours, I was in my plane. I was flying out to Wyoming. And then when I got called back, because what Harvey Schiller did and what Turner Broadcasting did is they exercised what's called legally in contract law a pay or play provision, which gives someone, an employer in this case, the right. They don't want to fire you, because they don't want you to actually go out into the marketplace and compete with them. So as long as they continue to pay you, they don't want you to come in. They don't want you to contribute anything. They're going to keep paying you until that contract expires. That was their way of keeping me locked up. Cool, I'm going to go fish until they call me to come back. And then I had an agent at that time by the name of David Tinzer with CAA. And I said, Dave, they didn't want me to come back. He said, let me handle this one. So David Tinzer, my agent, negotiated a deal where they had to pay me 100% of the money, it was 95%, of the money that they owed me on my 2.5-year contract, lump sum, and then they had to write me a new contract. And the new contract, now this is where I get involved, I wasn't an employee because I didn't want to be anymore. I was an independent contractor. Oh, and he had to throw 2 movies in, meaning they guaranteed, it's called a pay or play, or not pay or play. It's called a put commitment, meaning if I come to them with a movie idea that I want to do, and I have to, I have to have the director and the writer attached and all that. But if I give them a script and say, this is the movie I want to make, they either have to pay me to go make that movie or pay me to not make that movie.
So you pitched Santa with muscles too?
No, never even got that far. So when they said, we want you to come back and then here's your deal, and oh, by the way, you have to work with Vince Russo, I don't care. I'd work with anybody or with anybody for those kind of deals, those kind of terms. And joking aside, it was actually pretty fun initially. My impression of Vince when I first met him was favorable. Because I didn't have any history with him, I took him at face value.
And I mean, so when you guys are working together, and then obviously Hulk ends up, famously losing the match to Billy Kidman. And no disrespect to Billy Kidman, but it feels like if Hulk Hogan is going to come back and put someone over, the top of your list is perhaps not Billy Kidman. What was the idea behind him being the first guy that would kind of get this win over Hulk?
Honestly, the true answer is because so much of what I'm embarrassed to say this actually, but so much of what the internet and what the locker room, the disease that was really killing WCW was morale. And a lot of the locker room, the roster, and then the Dave Meltzers of the world said, oh, no, it's these old guys keeping the young guys down. That whole thing was our way creatively of going, no, it's not. You. No, it's not that the old guys are willing to put the young guys over. It's just that it's got to make sense. And Hulk was willing to do it, to make it. He was willing to be an example. And it was a bad decision. There's no question about it, in my opinion. And I like Billy. Billy's a great guy. He's still a good friend. He's working at WWE to this day as a producer. But it was a horrible decision. But it was Hulk's way and our way of trying to prove a point that the general consensus amongst wrestling fans is that the Roddy Pipers and the Ric Flairs and the Hulk Hogans didn't want to put younger guys over. This is our way of proving that that was not true.
And then obviously in 2000, WCW ends up falling apart, and by 2001, you were going to buy it. It was all set. We all know the story. My question was going to be, had you bought WCW and the Big Bang thing had happened in 2001, what was Hulk Hogan's role going to be, if any, in that WCW?
Nothing in terms of management. I think by that point, Hulk was looking for his creative exit strategy. He wasn't going to have any equity in the company. He would have been involved in the company. I think he would have been our version of The Undertaker that would have come in 2 or 3 times a year for that special attraction kind of opportunity. But that was really it.
And then the last thing I want to ask you about Hulk is, obviously you and him are in TNA together, and there's a kind of general consensus of a criticism of that era of TNA, the Hogan Bischoff era. It's talked about negatively. Is that fair, do you think? Is there a valid criticism in that, or do you sort of stand by the run that you guys had there and the things that you tried to do?
It's probably a little bit of both, to be honest. I think a lot of that criticism comes from the fact that people actually believed that Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff were running TNA. Nothing was further from the truth. First of all, I didn't want to go to work at TNA. I didn't need the money at that time. My partner, Jason Harvey, and I, at that time, had our own television production company, and we're doing quite well. It wasn't like, oh my God, I got to get back into wrestling business to pay my bills. I didn't need the money. TNA really, Dixie Carter, Jeff Jarrett, really wanted Hulk Hogan. The problem was Vince Russo was their booker. And by that point in time, Hulk Hogan was going to have no part of Vince Russo. Didn't trust him. So, and I was handling a lot of Hulk's business at the time. I was negotiating deals with him and for him and things like that. So when Dixie Carter reached out to Hulk, Hulk reached out to me and said, I'm only going if you're going because I want you to watch over my creative. Just my creative, not everybody else's in TNA, just anything to do with Hulk Hogan. And he wanted me to negotiate his deal with TNA, which I did. So I went, and I don't want to make it sound like I didn't want to go. I made the decision to do it. But I also made it clear in my contract with TNA that I was, number one, I'm not an employee. I don't want any responsibility for hiring, for firing. My job is to watch over and approve or not approve of Hulk Hogan's creative. Actually, I was like Jimmy Hart. Only I did. So I was kind of forced into TNA. Hulk wasn't going to go unless I was there to oversee. I ended up working there. But the truth is, there was not one management decision that either Hulk or I made. To be honest and fair, I especially, because it's my nature, I had a voice, I had some influence, but did not make one business decision in TNA.
I thought we could play a fun game, okay?
I hope so. It's been kind of brutal.
Sometimes people say that Hulk embellishes things. So I want to play a game of Hogan, fact or fiction. I'm only going to do 3 because they are very good friends and I don't want to ruin a friendship. So you just say fact or fiction, but you can plead the 5th on 1. Fact number 1, or Hogan claim number 1. The George Foreman grill was offered to Hulk first. Fact or fiction?
Fact. Now let me. Henry Holmes, the attorney that I talked about that gave me nightmares and made me drink more than I ever should have, was Hulk Hogan's attorney. Henry Holmes was also George Foreman's attorney. I have had this conversation with Henry Holmes. That's a fact.
We'll see if that keeps coming. Number 2, as written in Hulk Hogan's autobiography, he rewrote the scripts for Mr. Nanny and Santa with Muscles, but didn't get a credit for the writing.
I have to plead the 5th because I wouldn't know the answer one way or the other. I wasn't involved in any of it.
Okay, last one. Hulk said in his autobiography that he was almost the bass player for Metallica. You have pleaded the 5th. Fact or fiction?
I gotta go with fiction on that one. Sorry, Hulkster. Come on.
And we'll not ask about the decomposing corpse of the child at Wembley in 1992. We'll go on to the questions from the audience. So, first question is, was Vince McMahon behind the HLA moments on Raw during the Ruthless Aggression era?
I don't know. You know, when I got to WWE as a talent, what year was that, 2003?
2002.
2002? When I got there as a talent, man, I'd show up, I'd get my script, see what I was going to do, talk to my producers, go out and do it, get on a plane, come home. I never asked whose idea anything was, ever. The only time I finally got an answer years later was about the Chuck and Billy wedding scene. That was Brian Gewirtz. And I only found that out years later because Brian Gewirtz and I ended up becoming pretty good friends. and I was able to pry it out of them. But in WWE, there's a culture that's very unique, and it starts with Vince McMahon, and you never know which writers, which producers are coming up with anything. Nobody takes credit for it. Nobody blames anybody for it. You never freaking know. That being said, Vince all day long. He had me made out with his wife and his daughter.
Not at the same time, just in case anyone's wondering.
That would have been hot TV right there.
HLA2. Just to move on, who was the most fun victim of the 3-minute warning for you? When they would come out and you would do the whole 3 minutes thing?
Yeah.
Who was your favourite kind of victim? Because obviously it happened to Moolah and Mae Young, Patterson and Briscoe, Billy and Chuck. Was there a favourite that you had of them just beating people up?
I think there was a scene where there was like 3 strippers. Nothing against strippers. In fact, I've donated fair share of income to a handful of them, but these women should have not been strippers, and they had a very high opinion of themselves. So, and they had no idea what was coming. They're just like, oh, we're going to be on TV. Oh my gosh, think of all the money we're going to make on stage. Ah. And then the 3-minute warning hit, and Rosie and Jamal took care of business. And I'm thinking, had that coming.
Was all of the Raw, when you guys did the Raw roulette, how much that was predetermined? How did they rig it if it wasn't? Like, what was how did it get done?
I couldn't explain it in much detail mechanically because I wasn't involved in it, but it was rigged, obviously. And it's like the back of the wheel reflected the front of the wheel, and there was somebody behind the wheel that could make sure things went where they needed to go. It's the magic of television.
What was the mood like after hearing about the ratings jump when Tony Schiavone mentioned Mick Foley was going to win their world title?
Everybody, especially Mick Foley, because it's like the most important thing in his life. It worked the 20 other times we did it when I was giving away finishes, and everybody would, go nuts because Bischoff's giving away, Monday Night Raw finishes on live TV. It worked so well. It's one of the things that put us on the map until that one. That one backfired big time.
Did that make you stop giving away stuff because that one was such a big jump in the other direction?
I think we had pretty much wound. We hadn't done it a lot up until that point, but I think you're right. I think so. It might have been, okay, that trick worked for a long time and it's not working anymore, so let's quit doing that trick.
This is a very good question.
I'll be the judge.
Well, poor Brian. But Brian says, I know Eric wasn't in WWE at this point, but what's your opinion on if WWE had went with Hogan and Austin at WrestleMania 18 instead of Hogan and Rock? Do you think it would have got the same reaction that night as they did with The Rock? Also, Steve Austin's issues with the company were there. What do you think would have happened if they'd went with Austin, Hogan instead of Hogan and Rock?
It couldn't have worked. It would have worked amazing on paper, but Steve couldn't. You got 2 guys that can't work at that point. Steve was busted up. Hogan was busted up. You need somebody that can bounce. You're talking about 2018?
2002, WrestleMania 18, yeah.
Oh, 2002.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said 2018.
No.
I'm thinking Steve had a hard time getting up off the toilet in 2018.
No, when they did Rock and Hogan at WrestleMania 18, if they'd done Hogan and Austin instead that year, do you think it would have worked as well as Rock and Hogan?
I don't think so, because I think Austin had plateaued and was still doing really, really. Austin was still Austin at that point, but Rock was ascending. I don't think it would have done as well.
Do you think with that, if Austin and Hogan had got together to have a match, would there be any way for, you talked about chemistry earlier on. Could they have ever trusted each other, do you think? Two guys?
Yes. Steve he's as solid of a human being as anybody I've ever worked with. He'll look you in the eye. He'll tell you what he's feeling. He's as honest as anybody I've ever done business with. And I think they both wanted to work together. They both wish they could have worked together. I think if the timing would have been different, maybe if they both had an extra 10 years on their time clock, that would have been something that they both wanted to do. But Steve is an absolute pro's pro. And Hulk is too, in the right situation. So I think they could have had a great match, but it's a matter of timing.
This is hypothetical, but who do you think would have been more likely to offer to put the other one over?
Doesn't work for me, brother.
But I can't answer that. I don't know the answer to that. But let's just look at history. I'm driving down I-60, State Highway 60 in Marina del Rey on a Wednesday afternoon, and I get a phone call from Hulk Hogan who wants to put over Bill Goldberg on national television clean. So the potential would be there for Hulk, again, because it's a hypothetical. It's so much of it depends on the situation. But Hulk has demonstrated to me, and that's to all of us, that for the right reasons and the right opportunity, he'll do the right business. So I think it depends. And I also believe, because I've worked with Steve, and I actually know Steve way better now than I ever did, Steve's much the same way. But they're both very similar in it's got to be right for both of them. It's got to be the right circumstance. It's got to be the right business, and there has to be the chemistry. But I think they were either one of them would have had the potential of being willing to put the other over, given the right circumstances.
So we got two last questions. This one's a good one. What is your best or funniest Scott Hall story?
I don't have any funny Scott Hall stories, to be honest. I have a lot of great memories of Scott, and I have one that is the most profound to me, and I don't think Scott would mind if I shared this. And I don't want to end this on a down note, so hopefully you got something funny lined up for the finish here. But when I left WCW, and then I was brought back to WCW whenever it was, 2000, whatever, and I was working with a company called Fusion Media, and we were in the process of purchasing WCW from Turner Broadcasting. As a part of that process, once we kind of announced it and we were really working towards, okay, what are we going to do once we announce it, I had to go meet with key pieces of talent that we were going to decide to keep on board. And I wanted to see where their heads were at. I went down to Orlando to meet with Kevin and Scott. Kevin was still lived in Jacksonville at the time, but Scott was living in Orlando. Kevin came down to Orlando. I flew down to Orlando, and I spent a late afternoon. We went out to dinner, just shooting the breeze and getting a feel for each other. I was trying to figure out where their heads were at. And Scott wasn't really drinking that much. He may have had a drink or two or a beer or two at dinner. And then we got in the car, and there was a 12-pack in the car. Kevin was driving. And Scott, by that time, Scott had gotten pretty lit up, and he directed Kevin to go over to a strip club. It was a strip club that Scott Hall used to work at before he ever got into wrestling. He was a bouncer in the strip club. And by the time we got there, because it was like a 45-minute drive, by the time we got there, Scott was pretty well lit up. And I was just along for the ride, trying to reconnect with my friends who were going to end up possibly working for me again. And Scott started telling the story about when he was a bouncer in this club. And he got very animated and very emotional. It was I had not experienced anything quite like that before. It became very, like he was reliving the experience. Kevin pulled up to the strip club. It was about 8 o'clock at night, so there was a little bit of traffic there. cars there. So Scott's walking me around, and Kevin was there too, walking me around the strip club, and we got to a certain point by the door, and then Scott recreated a scene where when he was the bouncer there, trying to get somebody out of the bar, keep somebody from getting the bar. I don't remember the background of the story, but the guy pulled a gun on Scott. Scott wrestled the gun away from the guy, and the gun went off and killed him. And when Scott told me,
Bye. What?
it was impactful, and it kind of sunk in, because you look at somebody like a Scott Hall and the gifts that he had, his look, his just physical ability, his mind. People have. God. If you didn't know Scott Hall, you had no idea how talented he was. So to hear that story, yeah, that was tough. So we're gonna lighten it up.
We'll go later. So it's, you mentioned you were talking earlier about WCW and about people going back to rewatch stuff and like WCW Saturday Night and things like that. And somebody asked here, why do you think the WWE didn't take advantage of the WCW intellectual property like they maybe did with ECW? Because as an example, those shows you talked about, you can't find WCW Saturday Night on the network, or you can find a bit of it, but not a lot. Why do you think they didn't choose to use it more, make a WWE Nitro or a pay-per-view?
I don't know why you can't find WCW Saturday Night because there's some pretty crappy stuff on the network, but and there was a lot of great talent that was a part of WCW Saturday Night. Ric Flair and Arn Anderson and so many more, including Hulk Hogan and Steve Austin and others. But that show never, it was one step up from the old studio shows, you know what I mean, in terms of production value. That may have had something to do with it. But I think the reason that Vince never really wanted to showcase WCW is because it took a chunk out of his ass. It pushed him up against the wall. We almost, and I had heard this before, but when I actually went to work for WWE as the talent in 2002, I became pretty friendly with guys like Kevin Dunn and Bruce Pritchard and other people that had been around for a long time that were significant executives who flat out told me, once we got to be pretty good friends, I said, dude, you have no idea. They were literally taking the water coolers out of the office building because they couldn't afford to service the water coolers anymore. WWE almost went out of business because of WCW. And I think because of that, there was just, they were only willing to showcase WCW so much in the WWE portfolio, if that makes sense.
And do you think that's why, because obviously when you went to WWE in 2002, they finally got Goldberg the next year, and it was this 1 year deal where he looked like he didn't want to be there. It felt like they didn't want him to be there. And it seems this bizarre thing where you've got Goldberg, you've got this kind of cash cow ready to go, and they're just not going to make it work. It felt like it would just be the easiest thing in the world to make him a big star in WWE.
A lot of that had to do with Bill. And this is not a criticism of Bill, it's just a fact. Bill came into WCW with zero wrestling experience, very little wrestling knowledge, and very little wrestling interest, but it was a great opportunity, and Bill was done with his football career and really was looking for something else to do. He knew a lot of guys, he worked out with Stay and he worked out with Lex Luger at, Stay and Lex's Gym, so he had some contacts there. And I think honestly believe that Bill was like, what the hell, I'll give this a shot, see if it works, if not, not. He got into WCW. We put him into the power plant. We fast-tracked him. Before he knew it, he's beating everybody. He was 187-0 or whatever it was. And now he's beating Hulk Hogan in the main event on a Nitro that drew 45,000 people in the arena and probably did 12 million viewers at home and 6 million homes. So he got thrust into the limelight with very little fundamental skills. We worked hard to protect Bill. The reason he went to 176-0 or whatever the number was is because he wasn't able to have a 4 or 5 or 6 minute match that went back and forth. He comes out strong, the heel takes advantage of him, starts to cheat, he has to sell, he goes down, he makes his big comeback. That's a basic match, right? Bill didn't have the experience to do that. He was just, I'm going to snort fire, I'm going to spear you, I'm going to jackhammer you, I'm going to pin you. That's all he could do. And then you fast forward him through WCW and to the point where he beats Hogan. Fast forward again, now he's in WWE where the demand on your ability to work is increased tenfold. The expectations by Vince and everybody else in WWE, once you step into that ring, your work rate and your ability to tell stories in your ring means everything. Bill got there and he didn't have that skill set. And it was apparent. And there was resentment, there was resistance, there was lack of chemistry as a result.
So just to finish off, I have one last question for you. We've had some highs and lows tonight. We went through the Warrior. We've had some emotion. So let's finish with this. How big is Batista's dick?
Never been in a locker room with him, brother. I couldn't tell you.
We're never going to know. Well, listen,
You got to get Batista out here. You know, he'll do this.
I want to thank you all so much for coming out tonight. It's been great. If you did the meet and greet, the photos will be on our Facebook page. I want to thank Eric for braving 5-hour delays with seatbelt malfunctions to get here.
Thank you guys so much. This is awesome. It's great to be in Ireland. Thank you very much. I look forward to having a pint before I leave here tonight. So stick around. You've had 2 or I've had 2? I've had 4. Keep up, muckerfather.
Good night, everybody. Eric Bischoff!